No, Pokhara.
Pokhara. Ah, Pokhara.
Yeah.
These people right here are going to Pokhara
Oh,
next month. You should get together and talk.
Okay, sure.
Maybe you have a cousin.
200 kilometers west from there.
Okay. And yourself as well? In Kathmandu?
No, I'm in Java.
Oh,
East
okay.
Nepal.
East Nepal.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Have either of you been? Have you been to up to the Himalayas, to Everest Base Camp, anything like that? Have you gone on any of the treks?
No. But I was born around the Annapurna.
Yeah. That's on my bucket. That's the next thing to do. They're building the road up there now, right? So
Yeah.
they make it a little more touristy up there. So these folks, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the nervous mother of the 4 are going up to Annapurna. Can you hear me okay, Matt?
Yep.
Yeah. Are going up to Annapurna next month? October. That's when we were there. We were up there in October. It was a great time to go. So let me actually start by thanking Matt and thanking the Hooksett Library for having me here again. This is a wonderful library. This is a great room. I love being able to actually just plug my laptop into their own projector, and it's really simple and really easy. And they do all sorts of great programs here, as you guys know. And they're really supportive of local authors. And both of my books are actually available here at the library. They're also in Manchester. I'm actually from Manchester, so this is kind of my backyard. So it's a real thrill to be here. As you mentioned, I'm the associate publisher of Hippo Press. That's my background. I've been a reporter and a writer for about 25 years. I started in Buffalo, New York. So I am a Polish white boy from Buffalo who went to Mount Everest and who went to Kathmandu, where I was married. I actually was married in Kathmandu in a traditional Nepalese wedding ceremony to my wife. So you can imagine sort of the culture shock and the excitement, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. I have some actual wedding pictures. I bet you weren't expecting that, to see wedding pictures. So we're going to show some of those today, too. What I want to do is give you a very quick reading from the book. It'll be about 5 minutes. And then there's a short video, about 6 or 7 minutes, that kind of gives you some of my background and how I ended up going to Nepal and what we ended up doing while we were in Nepal. And then I'll show the slideshow. And the slideshow is going to be 2 parts. First part is going to be Kathmandu and the wedding. And the second part is going to be the Himalayas and our trek to Mount Everest Base Camp. So I'll do the reading. I let the video give a lot of my background so you know where I'm coming from, why we went there to begin with. And then I want to get it all out of the way in about an hour because I'd love to have a lot of questions and answers. These folks over here are actually going to Annapurna. Nepal is a place that will change you. You will come back different, I guarantee you. And hopefully after today, you all will be maybe more inspired, if not to trek to Nepal, then to just get outside and to explore different things and new things and get outside your box. Because in order to go to a place, in order for a Westerner, especially one like myself, to go to a place like Nepal, you have to get outside of your comfort zone. It's the only way that you can make it there. Then you can come back with more than what you came in with. So we'll talk a little bit about that too. And I think you folks, how long have you been in the country?
Almost 14 years.
14 years, wonderful. And you right here, Hooksett, Manchester?
Yeah, I live up here.
Awesome, that's great. Good for you. My wife is Nepalese born. She was born in Kathmandu. She came to Chicago when she was 11. So I call her conveniently ethnic because she's really Chicagoan. She only whips out the Nepalese when she needs it, but she's really from Chicago. So when her and I decided to get married, it was actually her father, and her father and mother in Chicago, it was her father who asked me if I would be interested in getting married in Kathmandu in a traditional Nepalese wedding ceremony. And I thought about that for about a quarter of a second before saying, my gosh, yes, of course. I mean, what an opportunity. And it was an amazing experience, an amazing opportunity to be literally dropped into the culture like that. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about cultural appropriation and what is appropriate and what isn't appropriate. We'll talk a little bit about Nepal as a third world country. We'll talk a little bit about the romanticizing of Nepal versus going there and seeing it for what it really is. And we'll get into all that stuff today. So, aside from you guys, no one else has been to Nepal? Have anyone been to Asia? Hong Kong, Tokyo, Hong Kong?
India.
India. Or what part of India?
Mumbai and Delhi.
Oh, nice.
My
How long
husband
ago?
is from Gujarat, and I have a child adopted from India and a child with them.
Wonderful.
2 year relatives.
So, when's the last time you were there?
About a year and a half ago.
Okay, so India. Anyone else? We went to Hong Kong, actually, before Nepal. I've been all over Europe. This is the first time that I've ever been to Asia. And we stopped for a few days in Hong Kong on the way to Kathmandu. And Hong Kong is the city of the future. Hong Kong is like the city of the year 3000, with talking trains and these bullet transportation things that shoot you around, and everybody's speaking 27 languages, and it's really clean, and it's really sparkling and shiny and new, and it looks like something out of Futurama. And then you get on a plane and you fly to Kathmandu, you fly to Nepal, and it's an agricultural society. So it's like going back 100 years in time. And it was really an interesting journey to take that step. So India, we're going to India next year. I've never been to India. My wife's grandmother lives in northern India. And that's actually what I'm going to be, partially of what I'm going to be reading for you. As I want to read just a quick section of the ceremony, and I actually had a procession, unlike a Western wedding, where the groom waits for the bride in a Nepalese wedding, or in this particular wedding, I came to the bride. Nepalese weddings can last anywhere from a couple of days to a few weeks, depending on what part of the country you're from and whether it's arranged or not, and all sorts of other things. Ours lasted 2 days. So I hadn't seen Meena in about 24 hours. I actually had handlers for aunties from London who came, who were able to speak both languages for me, and basically got me to the church on time. That was kind of their job. So I want to read a quick section from the procession. This is me on the way to the altar. My wedding ride, a beautiful new Ford adorned with flowers, inches through Kathmandu traffic. In front of the car, a full-on wedding band is walking. The joyous group, a cross between Bollywood and an American marching band, is putting down some amazing licks. They're blowing hard, and bystanders are beginning to notice. We are a wedding procession. This little row of cars and musicians is taking me to our altar, to Meenakshi. This is my wedding procession in Kathmandu. As we pass, people stop and stare. The whole group of construction workers stops pouring cement and uses my passing to take a cigarette break. I wave and they wave back. They laugh in the universal way that all men do when they see another male on his way to his wedding. Poor bastard. Lucky SOB. A tiny older woman in a dirty shawl moves closer to my window to get a better look. I hold my ground and smile. Satisfied, she turns and continues on her way. Kids on rusting, aching bikes pedal along, and motorbikers slow down as they pass. Somewhere on the route, we pick up a tall Western tourist with a video camera. Imagine how lucky he must feel, being able to bring back a videotape of an authentic Nepalese wedding procession. Oh, the stories he'll tell when he returns home. But I wonder if he even realizes I am a fellow Westerner. I suddenly feel like a fraud. Should I even be here? Is this the worst sort of cultural appropriation? Me here in a Nepali topi or formal hat given to me by my father-in-law along with the rest of my wedding clothes? Am I being sensitive enough? And is that even possible given the amazing circumstances of a Polish boy from Buffalo in his own wedding procession in Kathmandu? My heart starts pounding and I begin to sweat. I become so distracted by the internalization of my perhaps overly politically correct thoughts that I forget Meenakshi's grandmother is sitting next to me. She's the elder here. She came from India to be with her granddaughter, whom she has not seen in years. She hadn't even met me until yesterday. She could decide to be anywhere she wanted, but instead of being with Meena waiting for me at the altar, she chose to drive with me. She chose to break who knows what tradition to sit in the back seat of the Ford with a nervous white boy who didn't speak Nepali. She chose to be here because, she said later, she didn't wish me to be alone. And now, perhaps sensing my increasing discomfort, she reaches across the seat and takes hold of my hand and squeezes. It is a gesture of such simple kindness that all I can do is say thank you. She just smiles and nods, and I think to myself that maybe I'm going to be all right. So let's do the video. This was put together by my publisher, Bush Press, and it took a great deal of editing, trust me, to make me seem like I knew what I was talking about.
Those guys, you'll still get the same pleasure.
Well, I wrote the Nepal Chronicles so that anyone could read it. A lot of hiking books that I've read in the past, what that tells you is length of the trail and the conditions of the trail and how far you need to go and where to stop and where to go, and that is really boring to me. And I didn't want to write the book that I didn't like to read. So one of the things that I wanted to do was put together a book that actually, if you're planning on going to Nepal, if you're not planning on going to Nepal, if you've already been there, if you have no intention of going there, which most people probably won't, you still might want to read the book. And in order to do that, what I had to do is focus not just on the trail, not just on the miles, and not just on the conditions of the trail and the elevation, but I had to focus on the people. So I hope that if you're a hiker, you'll enjoy the book, because I do give the mileage and I do talk about the trails. But if you're a non-hiker, or if you're an armchair traveler, or if you love the Travel Channel, or you read Peter Mathiasen or Bill Bryson or those guys, you'll still get the same pleasure out of the book, because my intent was to simply put you in the place and give you some background of the Himalayas and of the culture and of the people who live there. I got interested in hiking in the first place in a kind of a strange way. I'm originally from Buffalo, and there's not a lot of mountains in western New York. So when I first came to New Hampshire, I was working for the Union Leader, and I was looking for stories. I was living in London area at the time, and I knew no one, and I had no friends. And I heard about this guy who was climbing Mount McKinley up in Denali National Park. His name was Jim Gagne. And I knew nothing about Mount McKinley or climbing or any of that type of stuff. And so I called him up because I thought it was a good story. And we talked for a while. I did the story, and he went off to Alaska. And he said, you know, when I come back, you know, if you're looking for something to do, you know, I'll take you for a hike. We'll go up into the White Mountains and we'll do some hiking together. And I said yes, not because I knew anything about hiking, but because I didn't know anyone, and he was making an offer for something to do. It was something to do, and I'd never been to the White Mountains. I didn't even know what the White Mountains were. So he finally came back, and he said, hey, let's go for a hike. And I said, great. And he said, have you ever heard of the Old Man in the Mountain? And I said, who's that? Because I had no idea what the Old Man in the Mountain was. And he said, well, we're going to climb up it. So my very first hike, not just in the White Mountains, but ever, was going up the caretaker's route of the Old Man Mountain. This was before 2003, when the Old Man fell down. So the caretaker's route is a overhead climb with cables and bars in the side of the rock. And halfway up, I puked, because it was such a huge effort for me, and I felt really sick, and I thought I was going to die. And but when we finally got to the top, I stepped out on what was the old man's forehead and looked down, right down the gully of Franconia Notch, and I knew that was going to be the rest of my life, because it was so amazing, and just the accomplishment of doing it. So that was the start of it for me, and it's been going ever since, for 15 years. I do have quite a bit of other hiking experience, some with my wife, some on my own. There are 48 mountains in New Hampshire that are over 4,000 feet tall, and the AMC has a club which is called the 4,000 Footers Club. If you hike all of the 4,000 footers, you get to join this club. And my wife and I both are members. I actually thru-hiked the Coast-to-Coast Trail. It's called the Wainwright Trail in England. That's 192 miles from one side to the other. And Meena and I spent a few days in the Grand Canyon, hiking in the bottom of the Grand Canyon. So together we've scaled about a dozen of the high points in the United States, including Humphreys Peak and most of the Appalachian Trail in New Hampshire. So when it came time for us to go to Nepal, we had already quite a bit of experience under our belts, which is one of the reasons why we decided to hike to Mount Everest Base Camp unguided and unportered. What that means is that we didn't hire a commercial trekking group to lead us to base camp, and we didn't hire a Sherpa or a porter to carry our gear. We carried our own gear, and we spent a lot of time researching the trek and the trail itself so that we could find our own way. We're very familiar, Meena and I, with the White Mountains, and the White Mountain trails are notoriously steep and rooty and rocky. They're very difficult trails. They're not high, but they're very difficult. So we did a lot of training in the White Mountains just to build our strength up. But the important thing was the altitude. The difficult part of the Himalayas is not the trails themselves. The trails are like super highways, and they're very
shallow, they're very clean, and they're very not rooty and rocky. But they're high. You know, when you fly into Lukla, you fly into about 9,000 feet, which is, you're already 3,000 feet higher than anything in New England. So we did a lot of cardio training in the year leading up to it. We did a lot of races, we did a lot of running to build our lung capacity. And we also gave ourselves a lot of time. If we were with a commercial trekking group typically averages 9 days, maybe 10 days. You have to go in and to go out. We gave ourselves 17 days. So we're actually able, because we're able to take our time, and because we have trained in cardio a great deal for the year prior to the event, we were able to actually train pretty well. So while there are risks, there's risks involved in any sort of hiking that are the obvious ones, like spraining an ankle or falling and hurting yourself. At altitude in the Himalayas, the main risk is acute mountain sickness, which is oxygen deprivation to your brain, and that comes at you sometimes without warning. It often starts with this little pinprick at the back of your head, and usually a few deep breaths and slowing down would make that go away, and we would be fine. So that was always a danger. Otherwise, not a lot. You don't want to be pushed off of a bridge by a yak. There's always that. I found, as a writer, as a travel writer, the biggest danger for me, and this might sound funny, was romanticizing Nepal and romanticizing the Himalayas. And it's really easy to do. You're out there, and the people are so kind, and it's such extraordinary beauty. What I have to remember is that a lot of the people up in the Himalayas are living in extreme poverty, or at least what we would consider extreme poverty. Not necessarily unhappy, but if any of them had the opportunity to jump out of a mansion in the suburbs of Boston, would they? You bet they would. So my job, I felt, to bring this place to the reader was not to make it a utopia or a nirvana, but to bring out the real culture and the real people and the real human experience, not that from my point of view, but what they were experiencing. I did take notes while we were hiking. I had to bring my notebook with me, and a notebook and a pencil, always a pencil, by the way, because you never know if the ink is going to freeze. The pens are notoriously unpredictable when you're out traveling. So I had several pencils with me, and every evening what I tried to do was take copious notes. This is what I saw. This is something that stood out for me. This is something I want to research more of when I get back. We also had a lot of photography equipment. I had a camera, a small camera. My wife had a small camera, and we had a large, good camera. And if I came across something, a plaque, a sign, some writing, something that looked interesting, I would always take a picture of it, so that this way I could actually go back later when I was writing about that particular experience, and I'd have an actual picture record. And I also had Meena, which she was my interpreter, which I had this huge advantage of being on the trail and being able to ask questions to the people at the tea houses, or to the yak herders, or to the porters, or to the Sherpa. So I was actually able to be a reporter in some cases on the trail because I had an interpreter with me. I think there's three things actually that makes a good traveler in order to get the type of experience out of travel that leads to not just visiting the Eiffel Tower, not that there's anything wrong with that, but to bringing something back with you. One is you need to have an insatiable curiosity. Two is you need to be fearless. And the most important one is that you need to leave all of your prejudices behind. And if you can do those three things, you're going to get much more out of travel than a tourist experience. There's nothing wrong with visiting the Eiffel Tower, or visiting Big Ben, or visiting the Liberty Bell. And in fact, if you go to those places, you should visit them. But if you want to learn about the people and the culture and the food, and if you want to get underneath everything that's presented on the surface, you need to go in with no prejudices. And if you do that, you can come back with a lot more than what you went in with.
It was weird to actually have a whole film crew in my office. That had never happened before. I spent the whole day beforehand furiously cleaning. what I want to do is begin the slideshow in Kathmandu. And I'll narrate this as we go. I'm going to do this manually, so if you have a question about a particular slide, or if you want me to stop and you see something you want to talk about, just raise your hand and let me know, and I'm happy to stop. Matt said that we can be here until like 1 in the morning right now. So we're never in any hurry. We're on, my wife calls it island time. We're on island time today. So we're going to throw the clock away, and we're going to have a talk about Nepal. And someone else has come who you're going as well? Okay.
Don't mind my odor.
So Kathmandu, we were there in October, November, a little bit of November of 2010. We were there about 4 or 5 years after the Maoist uprising had driven an awful lot of the country's villagers and from places, the valleys surrounding the city, down into Kathmandu. In 2003, the population of Kathmandu was 1.2 million. In 2010, the population was 2.1 million. It almost doubled in a decade, the population of Kathmandu, or the Kathmandu Valley. The result of that has been that the infrastructure of Kathmandu is not keeping up with the people in Kathmandu. And it's a little bit shocking for a Westerner to just getting around the streets in Kathmandu. When was the last time you were in Kathmandu?
2012.
2012. And when was the time before that?
I went in July.
So have you noticed the increase in traffic? And
Yeah.
It's crazy, isn't it? Yeah. My wife said, I have a reporter's mind, so I always want to know how things work. And she said, when you go to Kathmandu, because she goes every couple of years, when you go, I want you to put all that stuff in a box somewhere in the back of your head, because if you try to figure it out as you're there, you're not going to understand anything, and you're just going to freeze. And so there's the electrical system in Kathmandu. This is not Randy's laughing in the back. He's like,
That's a big problem.
Yeah, and it's not the only pole. Every pole is like this in Kathmandu. And I asked Mina's uncle, how can this possibly work, right? How can a city of 2 million possibly have an electrical system, a grid like this? And he said, it's actually really easy. He said, because in Kathmandu, if you have a business, that you want to start a business and you need electricity, all you need are 2 things. You need a huge roll of wire, and you need somebody to climb up a pole for you, and you have electricity. There's brownouts all the time. They do rollouts where a particular section or a particular ward has no electricity for a few hours a day, a few hours here. Her uncle had this enormous spool, a generator, an enormous spool of wire. So when his district had no electricity, he would take this wire and literally roll it to the district next to his that has electricity and plug it in, and his house would have electricity. And that's how it's done. It's crazy. So there's another sort of an alley scene. You can see the electrical, the grid, how crazy the grid is. Kathmandu is a 2,000-year-old city, and the population is just booming. We were there in October. We were there during the high holiday of Dassain. You're probably going to be there during the high holiday of Dassain. So you're going to see a lot of goats on the streets and all over the place. I think of Dassain sort of like our Thanksgiving. And with goats instead of turkeys. That's kind of how I look at it. I'm always going to be looking at him back there because I always want to make sure I'm getting this right. With goats instead of turkeys, so there's a lot of fellows around. I like this picture because another thing you're going to be seeing a lot of in Kathmandu is, do you see Mickey Mouse up there? I guarantee you that Walt Disney has not given real fruit power the copyright to use that image. And then you're going to see an awful lot of Walt Disney. Up in Lukla, there was a Starbucks at 9,000 feet up in the Himalayas. That happens often in the city. Typical street scene. The traffic is insane, absolutely insane. You share the streets not just with motorcycles and tuk-tuks, that's a little scooter thing there, and cars, but you share the streets with cows and chickens and altars. The infrastructure has the infrastructure has failed so terribly to keep up with all of the people. You will come around a turn and there'll be a telephone pole in the middle of the street with traffic going around two sides of it. So it takes a little while to get used to it. So my wife, that's a tuk-tuk. Well, it's like a little taxi cab. My wife thought it would be funny, because I'm a little claustrophobic, to, on my first day in Nepal, in Kathmandu, to take a ride on this thing. It's like a taxi cab. And then these little tuk-tuk stands, and you go and you tell the guy where he wants to go, and he heads off. And you bang on the side when you're ready to get off. That's how that works. And you can see about 6 people can fit inside that thing. So we got on it, and we start heading off, and 2 more people get on, and then 3 more people get on, and then 2 more people get on, and then 4 more people get on, and then somebody gets on the roof, and somebody gets his hanging on the side. And there was about, I'd say there was about 14 people on that thing by the time I had enough, and I banged on the side, and I was like, what are we off of this thing? Rickshaw. The rickshaw drivers in Kathmandu all own their own rickshaws, and they decorate them, and the idea being the more elaborate and decorated the rickshaw, the more it'll attract you to use their rickshaw. They're really beautiful, some of the decorations. So the subtitle of my book is Marriage, Mountains, and Momos in the Highest Place on Earth. Now I know you guys know what a momo is. Does anybody else know what a momo is?
It's a kind of dumpling.
It's a dumpling, yeah. It's like a Chinese dumpling. Or a pierogi, or a ravioli, or something like that. Every culture has this food where it's like something wrapped in dough. That's basically what it comes down to. And they are everywhere in Kathmandu. And we basically, when we were up in the Himalayas, we lived off of momos. Primarily, we lived off of vegetarian momos. But down in Kathmandu, they have chicken and they have goat. Goat momos are actually pretty good. So this is our momo man. He's like this cartoon character who walks around and tries to attract people to the bakery cafe, which is famous for its momos. You're going to be eating a lot of momos when you go to Nepal. Tamal, is it Tamal or Tamil? Tamal? Tamil, yeah. It's the hiker. It's basically the section of town where all the hikers go. All the commercial trekking crews go. All the hikers go. It's where I found internet and Skype and all of that sort of social media stuff is the strongest in the city. You'll probably end up staying somewhere in there. It's also where all of the brand name fakes are too, right? You can get a North Face or a Marmot for like $10 or $5, and it looks perfect. It really looks good. I brought home a Marmot from here, and it cost me, here would probably be a $300 jacket, and I paid $18 for it, so it was a real deal. But what I'll tell you though, is if you buy any gear here, don't take it into the mountains, because you're going to find out way too late that that's not the real deal. Buy it afterwards, and then take it home, and then show it off when you get back. So a typical street scene, it was the same. This is sort of a pedestrian area. I like this picture because you can see it's the very old building on the left with all the wires underneath the window there. A very new hotel on the right from 1960s. There's switch boxes. There's a little altar right in the middle of the street there. And Kathmandu has a way of, here in the west, when a building no longer suits its purposes anymore or is getting a little run down, we often just tear it down. They don't do that in Kathmandu. They just add on to it or brace it up and put something next to it. So you can see a lot of that. And one of the interesting things that, like I was just walking down this street, and as I was walking, I felt something licking my hand. It's really disconcerting for a Westerner to be walking in the crowd and feel something licking your hand. But I was actually able to turn around fast enough to see it was just this little guy who was walking by. My understanding of cows in India and in Kathmandu is this. The cow is a representation of the goddess Lakshmi, who is the bringer of prosperity and wealth. So it would be considered very, very bad luck to treat a cow badly in Nepal or in Kathmandu. There's probably a far more agricultural reason for it, but that's the one that I like. Because it licked my hand, so I figured I was lucky. So you can see a lot of these squares that sell a lot of things like kukuris, which is the little knife there, and prayer wheels and prayer bowls. I actually brought a couple of them for you to look at today. I'll leave this shot in as a reminder to myself, and also as I'm doing presentations that Nepal is a third world country, and there is grinding poverty in Kathmandu, and sometimes it's right next to something like this, which is the Yak and Yeti, which is an old royal palace, a royal British palace. It's now been converted into the main trekking and commercial trekking hotel and resort. And it's amazing to see that right in the middle of the city, and only about 2 blocks away from where that first picture was taken. So, you know, I write a lot in the book about how Nepal is this place of extreme beauty. It's a very paradoxical place. There's extreme beauty and there's extreme poverty, you know, hand in hand, both in the city and in the country. So Swambhu Temple, otherwise known as the Monkey Temple.
Yeah.
It is a pilgrimage site, both a Buddhist and a Hindu pilgrimage site, primarily Hindu pilgrimage site. It sits in the west part of the city. It dates from there's been architecture, artifacts on the temple found from the 6th century. It's an amazing place that has altars and temples, and it's not just an altar, it's a whole complex. And you can see the variety of architecture here, including that pagoda style, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Some of the amazing relief work here. The altar, while the temple itself dates from the 6th century, the actual altar is, the architecture there is now about 16th century. These are some prayer wheels, and the phrase is Om Mani Padme Hum, which is sort of loosely translated to all praise the lotus, which is all praise life, or have a happy life. And we'll talk a lot more about prayer wheels and mani stones when we get to the trail. There's some butter candles for offerings. Right, so here we are at the top of the temple. I was with my father-in-law, and you can see the mountains that surround Kathmandu. This is why Kathmandu sits in a valley, which is why the temperature is pretty temperate. It doesn't rain that much, it doesn't snow that much. It stays roughly the same, at least not by our standards. And I made the mistake of asking my father-in-law what the name of that mountain was. Because it's about a 9,000-foot mountain that sits just outside Kathmandu. Kathmandu is about 5,000 feet. And he laughed. And he said, we don't name our foothills. Those are just the foothills of the Himalayas. So we don't name 9,000-foot mountains in Nepal. That's just a little thing. Right, the monkey temple. So it's a cousin of the rhesus monkey. That actually, there's about 50 to 300 of them that live at the temple year-round. They're awesome. They'll take things right out of your backpack if you let them. The mythology behind the monkeys goes something like this. There's the Bhaktavista whose job it was to actually build the hill that the temple sits on. And he became so engaged in this task that he let his hygiene go, basically, and let his hair grow long. And as his hair grew long, he developed lice. And those lice fell off of his head and became the holy monkeys that are now at it. The real reason is because it's a migration route. Again, the mythology is much, much better. So even at a World Heritage Site, you have to exit through the gift shop. Durbar Square, another World Heritage Site, and one of my favorite places in Kathmandu. There are 3 Durbar Squares in each of the 3 cities, in the Tri-City, in the valley. Most of them date from as far back as the city has survived. They are sort of the Times Square of Kathmandu, where all of the big temples, where all the big structures, where the royal palace sits. Now that there is no monarchy in Kathmandu, the royal palace has become a museum, I believe, right? Yeah, has become a museum, but the palace itself is still there, the architecture is still there. A lot of this temple architecture is called Nawari design. Nawari are the original valley, the people from the Kathmandu Valley. That pagoda style did not come from Japan. It actually went to Japan from Nepal and from northern India. And some of these temples, like the one in the middle there, I believe is the temple to Lakshmi. But most of these temples date from 16th or 17th century. And they are open on special holidays. You can see the royal palace, obviously that is not 16th century. That actually dates from the turn of the century and has a lot of British influence to it. That was one of the coronation stands where a lot of the royalty would sit while the people were praying in front of it. It's now a museum. Another example of the pagoda style, or the Nawari style. I have to stop myself from saying pagoda style once I realized it was not, it was the other direction. Some of the woodwork around the royal palaces is amazing. A lot of this woodwork is about 130, 140 years old because of Kathmandu's unique position in the valley. Weather doesn't affect it that badly. It stays pretty normal temperatures, pretty same temperatures. So the woodwork, the reliefs on the woodwork are so old, are still preserved. I took a bunch of pictures of that because it's pretty amazing. So here's a sadhu. Anyone who's ever seen a Lonely Planet guide or a National Geographic show about Nepal, you've seen one of these guys. That's my wife in the background. She's not laughing at him, she's laughing at me because I'm taking a picture of him. And when I finished the picture, his hand went from this to this. And the funny joke, she told me a funny joke about sadhus, because they're holy men, they're temple holy men. And the only sadhus that you actually see are the ones who aren't the holy men, because the holy men are the ones who are actually off being holy in the temples. These guys are the tourist sadhus, but they just make for a great picture. I did give him some of these. Right, so, Momo hole in the wall. I like that it's Pepsi and Coca-Cola, even though only Fanta was served at this place. My advice to you, do not eat in a place like this until you're on your way down. Once you're on your way down, you can try anything. But while on your way up, I never got sick. I spent the month before we left, I had these Pepto-Bismol tablets. They're the pink tablets. I take one in the morning, I take one at night. I did that for a month, just coating my stomach before I left. And it really helped. And I also had Meena with me, who, as we walked down the street, she said, you can eat there, you can't eat there. You can eat there, you can't eat there. So, and then once we got back, she was like, I don't care where you eat. Gods and deities. There are 30,000 gods and deities in Nepal to choose from. 30,000. You can pick one. You can pick all 30.